Oh, you're right, because I was doing it on the other one. I was on StreamYard and not this one. So I'm just going to do that one again. Welcome to Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum, beautiful people. I'm your host, Kiko. I'm in the presence of three honorable guests this afternoon. They're going to talk to a very important issue and speak to that for the rest of the audience. Mike Miccioli is a Harvard University class of 2022 graduate. Paula Iasella is a Unity for J Free Assange activist and organizer. And Susan McLucas is a Boston peace organizer and activist. Welcome to the show, y'all, and thanks for accepting my invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. It's such an urgent matter, and we organized this relatively quickly considering the circumstances and everything. I had an emergency actually last night, but I was saying to myself, I'm going to keep the interview intact. I'm not going to not do the interview. And we're all here today smiling in front of each other. And so hopefully we can inform the public of this important issue of Julian Assange. Can Mike, Paula, and Susan kind of give a few sentences to the audience as far as who you are, what got you into activist work, what brought you into this sphere when it comes to bringing consciousness to the people when it comes to these issues?
I'll start. My name's Mike. I guess I originally got involved in student activism as an undergrad at Harvard with co-founding the organization Harvard Students for Bernie Sanders for his 2020 campaign run, and then continued to do work with groups like the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee and Harvard YDSA, a Democratic Socialist organization. And then I guess I just personally had an interest in Assange's case for a while. And so I helped to organize a demonstration against Attorney General Merrick Garland when he was speaking at Harvard for our commencement this past spring, because he's leading the prosecution against Julian Assange. So I guess that's kind of my background, and I'm currently a PhD student at U Chicago.
Again, congratulations. Paula.
Yes, I'm from New Hampshire. I came late in life to activism. I started becoming more active in the anti-war movement here on the East Coast. I followed Julian Assange loosely. I didn't know much about WikiLeaks, just the basics. And we all followed him on Twitter because he was such a great source of international news. He was quite a leader. In 2018, they silenced him. And that I found that shocking. How could they take such a prominent voice and just wipe him off the internet? And it made me mad. And so I joined a group that was forming called Unity for J. I worked hard on that. I was one of the admins. I learned activism. I bring my art to it, and I've learned to write because of everything that's involved in fighting for this movement. I now am a co-organizer on the Boston group, the Boston Area Assange Defense, which is part of a branch of the Assange Defense National Committee. And I also am one of the primary organizers on DC Action for Assange, where we have to put our attention now. As Mike said, we just need the Attorney General to drop the charges on this. It just needs to happen. So that's where we are right now. We're organizing a big action October 8th. In solidarity with Stella Morris's UK Surround Parliament in London. And so presently we're organizing for that. And thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. And Susan?
Hi, I'm Susan McLucas, based around Boston. Started activism in college with trying to stop the Vietnam War, and then trying to shut down Seabrook nuclear plant, and trying to shut down the CIA, figure out who killed Kennedy. Did a lot of work for Chelsea Manning, and that led very seamlessly into working for Julian Assange. When Chelsea Manning was released from prison, I had a big party and we celebrated and raised some money for her, and it was like the first thing I've ever worked for that actually happened, and it was such a thrill. We hope we have such a party soon for Julian.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely do too. That's all we can hope for, right? And if we keep this going, this information, we're really combating information from lots of different angles, and we can get into that. But I do want to kind of start with people who may not know who Julian Assange is, and anyone can kind of, I guess this question can be directed towards anybody as far as how would you describe Julian Assange to someone who has never heard of him before, and the importance of WikiLeaks? And that can go for anybody.
Paula, you want to take that?
Oh yeah, it's there's so much to cover, but I guess the basics are Julian Assange is an Australian. He majored in physics, and he was a computer programmer. And he developed an international nonprofit publishing organization called WikiLeaks in 2006, and that was created in Iceland. So the Espionage Act has him being charged under the Espionage Act, which should only be for an American, but people have to remember he's Australian, and they try to paint him as a hacker. He's a publisher and a journalist. He's written several books. He's a brilliant man. Of course, they're not afraid of people that aren't brilliant, that aren't leaders. So I would say that the governments around the world are afraid of him because he developed something that can bring them down, stop the wars, and bring truth to light about criminal activity in the government. So you can see why they have targeted him, and why he's in prison right now. I've probably skipped a lot of the basics, as Susan can fill in on that.
No, you're fine.
So in 2010 and 11, he published a whole lot of secret documents that really angered the United States. The most famous one you can still see on the internet at collateralmurder.com. It shows American soldiers killing Iraqi citizens in 2007, I think it was, from a helicopter, and having a good old time. And it's all very official. They ask for permission, and they get permission to engage, as they say, meaning slaughter the people. And they killed 12 people, including the Good Samaritan who came along to rescue the wounded. And so this was classified because the government doesn't want to look bad. But Julian Assange said that wars are started by lies and peace can be started by truth. And so that's what he was trying to do. He stuck his neck out and said, I'm probably going to get in trouble, and the biggest country in the world, most powerful people are not going to like this, but we have to stop these wars. And so get this information out here. And he's suffering the consequences now.
Yeah, and I would just add that although his charges are currently for information that he published in Iraq that Susan mentioned, and also in Afghanistan, the Afghan diaries, he published lots of evidence of underreporting of civilian deaths in Afghanistan. But he's really quite a prolific publisher, and he's published everything from, evidence of abuse in Guantanamo Bay to evidence of corruption in the DNC in 2016 to all sorts of different countries. He's, uncovered surveillance that private companies were doing on civilians in Russia alongside their government. He's a lot of revelations that he published led to uprisings in Tunisia in 2011, which led to a lot of the Arab Spring. And he's really kind of exposed corruption in all sorts of different governments, but the US only likes to focus on the corruption that he's exposed in their government to try and paint him as some sort of foreign agent.
And Mike, kind of what you were speaking to, I was looking over it last night. I've read quite a few chapters in this book called the WikiLeaks Files. I'm actually going to link it to the episode description. And I wanted to get back to a point of what Susan mentioned before. We talked a little bit about some of these atrocities that we pointed out. Is that collateral murder? Is that part of the consortium news published library archive that Paula sent me, where they had that 40-minute movie? Was that the clip that you were talking about? Did that come from that movie?
Yes, Kiko. In that movie, that was Juan Passarelli's. I think that was a 2020 film that he created called "The War on Journalism." The case of Julian Assange. Boston presented that in last year in October, and he does show clips. There are clips from the collateral murder in that film.
Okay.
It's a great film. It's a great overview. In 40 minutes, they cover so much of the case.
Yes, and I will also be linking that to the episode description, because I think for a lot of people, and I don't want to accuse anyone like the populace. I know that there are tendencies in our populace in this headline-driven world and this soundbite-driven world, but I think when they see this visual image and just these moving images of, you can't even really do anything but, you know, be angry, cry about it. There's just so many emotions you get when you see stuff like that, and you start to question, where do you even start when it comes to if this is happening, what's happened before they published this WikiLeaks? You know, what else is going on besides what WikiLeaks is showing us, which is substantial information. I mean, I can't believe that WikiLeaks is almost a library within the journalistic space. It should be the standard for any sort of independent journalism in the world, but instead it's being basically put aside and just, you know, led to basically not survive at all, which is something that I think is interesting, considering that if I read this right, they've been accurate on pretty much all their descriptions, all their news stories. And I think of these quote unquote legitimate news medias like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And I don't know if they can say that they have 100% track record when it comes to not telling the truth. And I just think that it's crazy that an agency like this is being under attack, and the public seems more or less complicit with it because the government and the news is telling us that that's okay, because they're basically on the outside. They're not part of us, so they're not legitimate. Can someone speak to that? How is WikiLeaks delegitimized when you could make the easy argument that they should be the journalistic standard? How do we change that narrative?
Well, it's true. They have never had to retract anything that they've said. And even the government, when they were doing their hearings against Assange, would have been the perfect time to mention if they had any evidence that the releases that he made actually hurt US agents, and they didn't. In fact, they have specifically said that that wasn't true. But still, I think the smears that they succeeded in getting attached to him have made a lot of people just figure, well, he's not a nice guy, so don't worry about what happens to him. Or I don't know, I scratch my head wondering how it's possible, because it's just so obvious that he shouldn't be in prison awaiting extradition to face a 175-year term. We've, you know, written and called President Biden and Merrick Garland, and I don't get how they're not following Obama's example. He wasn't great on a lot of things, but at least he had the sense to say, we can't really prosecute Julian Assange because we'd have to prosecute the New York Times and all the other journalists at the same time. And but Biden came in, and I don't know, he just said, oh, well, if it's good enough for Trump, let's just go along. It's not, I really don't get it. I thought, you know, he's supposedly trying to say he's so much better than Trump, but he's not showing it.
Does anyone else want to kind of speak about the journalistic integrity of WikiLeaks and versus what we've basically been force-fed all these years as what are supposed to be the legitimate sources of information?
Yeah, Kiko, you're right that WikiLeaks functions differently than other journalistic outlets, and that they've tried to demonize him as not that he shouldn't be recognized as an actual journalist. And I think that's because the more mainstream news outlets often they promote the ideology of the United States and its ruling class, and intentionally try and promote its foreign policy. So they'll even, run certain stories by the State Department, ask for approval if they can publish certain things. They'll usually take comments from government officials without question and kind of just take their word for a lot of different things. And WikiLeaks has really kind of acted a lot differently. As you said, they should be kind of setting the standard for what a journalist should look like and what a media outlet should look like. And I think that a lot of people in the more, established corporate media do try and demonize Assange because they realize that he's doing a lot more important and significant work than they are. I mean, you just look at how many groundbreaking stories Assange has been a part of in his career. It's, something that most of the people working in mainstream media won't ever, have a story that large, let alone that many. So I think that in order to maintain their connections with a lot of their sources and maintain access, they have to kind of be very civil with the US government. And so they're kind of jealous of Assange in a way because he has a lot more freedom to publish what he wants to.
Absolutely. Paula, would you like to add anything in this angle?
I would. I'd like to back up to 2010, the same media that Mike is talking about that now smeared him for a decade. Back in 2010, he had partners, the partners that helped him publish the work. It wasn't just WikiLeaks, and there was The Guardian, the New York Times, the El País. There were several.
Der Spiegel.
Der Spiegel.
The Spiegel.
So, yeah, so they all were helping with that. But when it came down to redaction time, they were frustrated with Julian taking his time to redact. So they kind of left him to do it by himself. So he stayed up for I don't know how long making redactions. And then they turn around, and that's one of the things they smear him on, that he dumped these publications carelessly, and they call it a dump. But it was actually Julian that was doing the redacting and cared about it. And he wasn't the first one to publish the unredacted files. It was Cryptome. So the government never went after Cryptome. So it wasn't the fact that they were published. It was this is an isolated prosecution, because if they prosecuted Julian for publishing it, they'd have to go after Cryptome, New York Times. And let's remember, they all won awards off of Julian's material. So he was a hero in the beginning. He was a media hero, uncovering these war crimes. And then slowly over the years, he lost friends because he pinned the deaths that happened in Iraq on each journalist. He made a statement about that the media was responsible for pushing a war that was built on lies. And when he was outspoken like that, and he made a lot of enemies because he called them out. He called them out on their inefficiency and their ties to the government, and like Mike said, just getting their talking points and their information straight from the CIA, not questioning, not investigating. And so he actually pinned the number of deaths per journalist that spread the lies of the government. So yeah.
So you mentioned the CIA. This same document, again, for the listeners, all this information that we're going to link after the episode description is worth a look. It's going to be worth your time if you want to investigate more about this crusade against Julian Assange and his WikiLeaks What would it be considered a journalistic organization? Would that be a good way of describing it? Because I want to give it justice. So he mentions the CIA numerous times, the FBI, the NSA, the ICC, the International Criminal Court. He talks about all these bodies and entities, but he talks a lot about how the United States in particular and the US allies want to basically change the rules when it comes to foreign policy. How they're not tried for war crimes at The Hague, but and countries like Israel are sort of absolved of blame at all, but they like to throw the blame on countries like Iran. Even now, the whole Russia-Ukraine situation is scary. If you read the 2015 published book, the WikiLeaks files, it talks all about the Orange Revolution, all that stuff in Ukraine that was happening then. It's like people forgot that stuff happened back in 2013, 2014, like there was no lead up at all. And he breaks it down so much. And I think that's what scares them so much, is that it's so detailed and it implicates everyone that we've known in the government, that's functioning in the government. Henry Kissinger, anybody that we've known that's had anything to do with the military industrial complex, he exposes every single one of those people in that book.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct, because the thing that made WikiLeaks so frightening is that he revealed things almost in real time. That's one of the, I think that was in part in Daniel Ellsberg's witness testimony at the end of 2020. He said the thing that was really shocking about the WikiLeaks revelations and publications is that they were revealed in a time when the people that committed those crimes could have been prosecuted. It didn't happen 10 years or 20 years when everybody's dead. It almost happened in real time. And also the WikiLeaks showed that these war crimes weren't just single acts. He showed that they were systemic, that it was systematic. It was something that the US government does, and it does all the time. It was part of, our what war does. And just the crimes against the people and the civilian killings, where they would come to a stop where a little girl was begging for candy and one guy got out of the tank and just blew her away. And Julian talks about that on Democracy Now!, the girl in the yellow dress, just for random crimes like that. And it was all revealed in these diaries and the logs. So it was the collateral murder, which was big, with the helicopter, the Apache helicopter. And then there are all these small incidents that Daniel Ellsberg reported in his witness testimony that people don't think about. Just the thousands of crimes against people, civilians. And they're trying to pin on Julian that he put people at risk and danger after they've killed millions out in the Middle East.
Yeah, and just to add what Kiko said about revealing how the U.S. plays by different rules or doesn't follow the rules, Merrick Garland recently took a trip to Ukraine where he was supposedly, documenting war crimes, but no one's ever been prosecuted for U.S. war crimes. No one was ever prosecuted for the invasion of Iraq, which was, far more deadly and unprovoked than anything in Ukraine right now. And the American Attorney General isn't concerned with prosecuting American war criminals. He's just, making a show of going over to Ukraine. And then, of course, he's also concerned with prosecuting people like Assange and Manning, who revealed the actual war crimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Susan, we're bouncing around, but I think we're consistent. As long as we stick to Assange and related stuff, we're good.
Sure.
So Susan, do you have anything to add?
Well, we're hoping people will contact our government and write the White House, write the Attorney General. The easiest way to write the White House is online. You just go to whitehouse.gov/contact. You can say whatever you want. Free Assange, and tell them why you think they should. And you can go to talk to Merrick Garland. You can go to justice.gov/ contact-us, or else call them at 202-353-1555. And, you know, they must have gotten a lot of messages already, but we just need to keep them coming in. We're kind of excited that more news outlets are jumping on the bandwagon. The New York Times and the Guardian have been on record for a while as saying this prosecution is not the right thing. And then just today, the Chicago Tribune came out with a really good op-ed that one of our people in the Julian Assange National Committee wrote. And I don't know, people just have to keep building it up and making there be a cost to them. When President Biden went to see AMLO, the president of Mexico, he brought it up. And, or maybe I guess AMLO came to Washington, and he came with a letter, and he has offered Assange asylum in a couple of other countries, Chile and something, Paula, you know what. And I don't know, it's just so horrible. And the thing that breaks my heart is Bernie Sanders was on the way to winning the presidential election, and the DNC absolutely undercut him,
For sure.
at least, and possibly just, you know, found a way to have the votes not counted right. But at least they did all they could to keep him from being elected. And I'm sure he would not be going along with the Trump prosecution of Julian Assange. So
But we have to remember that the prosecution isn't about the DNC leaks, that it really is the war logs and the state cables, the diplomatic state cables, which embarrassed a lot of top statespersons. That was, I think they were really angered by that. They were especially angered by Vault 7. That isn't part of the prosecution, but is really what got Mike Pompeo to actually uncover the indictment and actually set out to prosecute him. And another point I want to make is people have to remember that all the international awards that Julian won, and there are dozens, he won peace prizes and just the highest international awards out there. And that those same documents he won the awards for are the same documents that he's being prosecuted for. And that in itself is a huge red flag. And I would like to go over the red flags at some point too, all the irregularities in the case that just are crazy. I mean, it's so before we close the program, Kiko, I would like to try to, you know, uncover some of them, because there's kind of a long list. And then Mike, I'd like Mike to talk about the Espionage Act, which is crazy in itself, because he's got that down pretty well.
Absolutely. I was actually going to say, I wanted to kind of, the one thing about it, I kind of wanted a well-rounded, and I think we're getting that. I didn't want to focus just on Julian's situation, because we know that he's going through so much. He has gone through so much. And I just didn't want it to be all about his dire straits situation in the Ecuadorian embassy. I didn't want it to be all about Belmarsh. I didn't want it to be all about that. I wanted the audience to kind of see his value and his company's value, which we've done a good job, I think, of sort of exposing and showing people. But I do want the audience to more or less know the potency of the Boston area when it comes to advocating Assange-related issues. It seems like there's a strong base in Boston. And what are y'all doing on the ground to bring awareness to the people in the greater Boston area and surrounding areas when it comes to Assange? And maybe we can talk a little bit about the October 8th activity coming up, and then we can talk more about the Espionage Act and even the Vault 7 stuff that you mentioned.
And we want to go through those irregularities that Paula is talking about. But we have a public standout every 3 weeks now. We were doing 2 weeks for a while, and so our next one is going to be on the 3rd of October. at Park Street Station at 11 o'clock. And we always invite the press. They don't really come very often. Sometimes a student paper will come, but we still think something is going across their desk. They hear about Julian Assange every 2 or 3 weeks, and we hope that's something. And we, at the standouts, we hand out literature which says, call this and that person, and gives a little rundown of the case. And so we hope we're planting seeds in people's minds. We have a petition we get people to sign. We encourage them to write letters, and sometimes we have letters for them to sign there to Merrick Garland. But we wish we could do more. It's a little frustrating. It's wonderful to be on your program, Kiko, and it's a nice way to get the word out. Sometimes, most of the people who walk by us at Park Street Station do their best to ignore us, and a few people come over and we get thumbs up from some, but we need to get the word out there more.
Well, that's how we met Mike. It can be kind of like frustrating. You wonder what kind of impact you make. And then Mike came to one of our, I think it was a summer rally. And then we heard from him, by the way, Merrick Garland's going to be commencement speaker at the end of May. We wouldn't have known that. We would absolutely not have been aware of that had Mike not brought that to our attention. And he asked us to co-organize with that. And so that those little visibilities that we're doing on the corner in Boston, we meet people like Mike. We met someone from Philadelphia who's going to go home, and he's starting his own group, Assange group there. So that's because Susan and I are showing up regularly on the streets of Boston. You don't know, like she said, who you're going to meet and where it's going to take you. And, we have Mike to thank for that awesome visibility we did at the end of May.
At Harvard, yeah.
Harvard Square. That was great.
I did have a question for Mike in this regards. So you don't have to implicate people, but you definitely stood out because I found out about you all through the LA Progressive article that I read. And then I saw the Assange Boston site. I looked at that some, and that's how I reached out to Paula. And she was a little surprised at first, like, how did he find out who I was? But I'm a researcher for a living, so I really try to take the time to look into stuff. But I want to ask you, how is the reception of Mike when it comes to people that you associate with? Do these people know about Julian Assange, or are you just like on an island when it comes to trying to bring this stuff to people's attention?
Well, I find that, I guess, people in some of these activist spaces on campus are, I guess, receptive to Julian Assange and his fight for freedom and the fight for a free press. But like you said, a lot of people aren't really aware of his case, or hardly even know who he is. And these are people even who are involved in progressive activism, not just any ordinary person. So I think that a lot of the battle is uphill because I guess there's been so little coverage of his case. Not enough attention has been I guess directed against it in the media, especially considering what a threat this poses to anyone in the media who's interested in doing any kind of investigative journalism. So yeah, I find that I guess people can be receptive, but not enough people are familiar with the case.
We're talking about First Amendment violations. We're talking about illegality, period. When we speak of the Espionage Act, which is actually crazy, that, like Paula was saying, Julian Assange is Australian. We're charging an Australian under a crime he basically reported on things that he observed and got from other people. What a journalist does, like, at least that's what I thought a journalist does. And he's getting charged for doing a job, basically, for uncovering the truth, for being a truth teller. He gets in trouble for that. What exactly is the Espionage Act? Is that from 1917, if I'm not mistaken? Like, what exactly is the Espionage Act, and what could be the implications of Julian's situation?
Yeah, the Espionage Act was written in 1917 during the World War I period. And if you look at the text of the bill, it seems like it's intended for people who are like trying to actually undermine military battles. All of the language is, if you look at it, is about, someone who's trying to like actually give battle information on the United States to other countries in order to try and help some other side win the battle, as if they were like a legitimate spy. But if you look at the way that the Espionage Act has been used through history, it's actually been used really to crack down on all different types of dissent. Like during World War I, people who were distributing flyers against the draft, advocating that the U.S. not get involved in World War I, they were arrested under the Espionage Act. Journalists and people who were Congress people even were arrested for advocating against World War I. All sorts of, socialists like Eugene Debs was prosecuted under the Espionage Act. So, and then if you look at the more modern history, people like Daniel Ellsberg initially was prosecuted under the Espionage Act before his trial was eventually thrown out because it was, I guess, declared a mistrial because the U.S. government was caught trying to break into his psychiatrist's office and dig up dirt on him. And then President Obama really ramped up a lot of the prosecutions under the Espionage Act in the modern era, and he prosecuted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all previous presidents combined in the United States. So it's really kind of what seems to be intended originally for, spies that were trying to, specifically undermine the U.S. in military battles is now being used to prosecute journalists for publishing information. And the U.S.'s interpretation of the act is, one of the most extreme possible, which is that by publishing evidence of crimes and corruption of a government, that is equivalent to intentionally trying to harm the United States and, aid a foreign enemy, as if it were like a battle for war. So if Julian Assange is extradited under this Espionage Act, this would threaten any journalist who does national security reporting on foreign policy and investigative journalism, where they're dealing with leaked documents, which has always been something that journalists have done.
Yeah, and one of the really terrible things about the Espionage Act is it specifically disallows any testimony about why a person did the thing that was against the law. They can't say, I was trying to save lives by showing this and stopping the war. No. If you released it and it was classified, you're guilty, and that's the end of the story. No necessity defense, as they call it. But we want to get into some of these terrible things about the
Yes, no doubt.
trial.
I want to hear about the trial, and I also wanted a clarification on what Vault 7 is, so the audience can know what that is regarding Pompeo.
Kiko, could I backtrack on the Espionage Act for just
You
a
sure
second?
can. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to bring people up to date on that. The really positive things that are closely related to Julian is that there's now Espionage Act reform going through the government right now. Representative Tlaib did one, I forget, earlier in the year. Now, currently, we I think in July, there's bipartisan bill to reform it. And like Mike was talking about it, being an originally a bill that would prosecute spies. Now it's spread out. It includes our truth tellers and journalists. So they're trying to rein it in and bring it back to spies only. And that would be Ro Khanna, Thomas Massey, and Ron Wyden, who are
Okay.
sponsoring that bill. And so there is hope. At least there's some kind of movement, feeling like people want to rein it in. I know Senator Warren is working on a bill that is asking for more transparency. And that has exactly what to do with Julian. I mean, WikiLeaks was all about transparency.
Mhm.
So if Senator Warren and others are supporting bills that want more transparency, they want to be told the cost of war, then this all has to do with Julian Assange's freedom. So that the work on the Espionage Act to dismantle it is encouraging.
Yes, it is. I didn't even know about those developments. So I appreciate you bringing it to light. Absolutely. So y'all are going to talk a little bit about the case against Assange and go into some of the details of that. And again, I hope the audience is kind of getting a build up to the whole situation, which we'll probably get to. But I really want them, I guess, in the closing, to definitely acknowledge and see what he is going through currently as well. What we got from as far as the Ecuadorian embassy until the situation he's right now in a high security prison in England. But let's talk about the actual case and some of the files against him. When did the first revving up against Assange start that led to this point that we're talking about now?
Well, I guess I guess we'd have to go back to 2010 when the original, I guess when the Iraq war logs and the Afghan diaries came out, and Assange was in Sweden at the time. And so I guess secretly the United States had begun drafting a sealed indictment against Assange using the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which they were accusing him of conspiring with Chelsea Manning to hack into government computers. But Chelsea Manning already had access to all of the files that she gave to Assange before she even contacted him. The only thing that Assange did was he attempted unsuccessfully to help Manning maintain her anonymity when giving him the files, which is standard procedure for any investigative journalist. So that was when Assange was still in Sweden. And then at the time when Assange was in Sweden, I guess the US government was talking to the Swedish government and trying to entrap Assange in a separate prosecution for alleged, I guess, sex crimes, which the case has kind of fallen apart since, if you'd want to go into that later. But so Sweden was collaborating with the United States government. And so once Assange was had traveled to the UK, Sweden tried to extradite Assange back to Sweden for questioning. But Assange wanted a guarantee that he would not be extradited then to the United States if he went to Sweden for questioning, but neither the United States nor Sweden was willing to provide him with that guarantee. So that's when he sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, and he eventually became an Ecuadorian citizen, but he was kind of trapped there in the London embassy for Ecuador for 7 years before he was eventually kicked out in 2019, and the London police stormed into the Ecuadorian embassy and arrested him.
Incredible.
Against international law. Julian had political asylum, and the people are that was very concerning, because it makes it shaky ground for all political asylees that have refuge, that they can storm in and drag you out.
Okay. So what are some of the details of the case? Because this is something that I'm going to be taking notes when you guys tell me about this stuff, because this is one of the areas where I don't know a lot about what's going on. So can we speak specifically to the case itself?
Which case are we talking about?
We're talking about now, we're talking about the files. We're talking about his situation now, the case in court.
Well, I guess Assange has been in Belmarsh prison since 2019 when he was dragged out of the embassy. And Belmarsh prison is known as the Guantanamo of London because it's where all of the, I guess, most violent and dangerous criminals are kept, like, terrorists and murderers and everything. And so since 2019, he's been kept there, and the process has really just been dragging out for years. The initial ruling of the case was that he could not be extradited to the United States because his life would be in jeopardy in a U.S. security and in a U.S. maximum security prison. And they thought that he would, I guess, commit suicide and that his life was in danger. And so then the U.S. government appealed that case, and it went up to the high court, and they reversed that case because they said the U.S. gave assurances that they would have, I guess, safe conditions for him, which is pretty questionable considering the fact that it's been revealed that the CIA already had plots to assassinate him when he was still in the Ecuadorian embassy. So I guess that's the government that they're trusting to keep him in safe hands. But so after that, it was overturned in the high court, and then Assange tried to appeal that to the Supreme Court in the UK, but the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it. They denied that, and so then it went to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel of the UK, who signed off on his extradition. But then Assange has appealed that ruling, and so it's still tied up in the courts in the UK.
Awesome. So again, the point of this is that, I know some of this is reiteration, the audience can't get too much information because they've been bombarded with complete opposite narratives of what we're saying in a lot of these situations. Even publications like The Atlantic, that a lot of my friends look up to, just complete smear pieces against Assange. So let's get into some of those smear pieces and misinformation angles towards Assange. What will be some of the biggest smears and misinformation pieces towards Assange? Susan or Paula can address that issue.
Well, they had this crazy situation where some women went to the police and said they had concerns. They wanted Assange to take a HIV test. They never said that he assaulted them, and the police turned it into an assault allegation. One of the women said they just wanted to get their hands on him. And so it seems like the Swedish government and the US were just working to find something to pin on him. And then a lot of people hold against him the fact that he released the emails that the DNC was sending around where they were conspiring against Bernie Sanders. And when people say, well, why did he do that? I tell them, well, why did the DNC try to steal the election from Bernie Sanders? There's one that have something to explain. What Assange released was true, and who knows how much it had to do with the results of the election, but it was true. So, when Ellsberg was in trouble for releasing the Pentagon Papers, and Nixon's people went in and tried to find dirt from his psychiatrist's office, the case was dismissed. And now Assange is in trouble and the CIA tries to kill him. And wouldn't you think that would be a reason to dismiss the case?
Exactly, absolutely.
And there was also the security firm that was at the embassy, UC Global, they were giving information to the court in the US that would hear the case when it comes. That's highly irregular.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were also searching the phones and spying on all of the visitors, the lawyers and other people that came to visit Assange. And some of them are now doing a lawsuit against the CIA and Mike Pompeo and the security firm. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that comes out. It seems like the media is a little bit more willing to cover that case than they are the whole case against Assange. And so we'll see what comes of that.
Yes, Paula, is there anything you want to add to this or something you want to speak to regarding Assange?
Well, I'd like, in regard to what Susan just said about blaming Assange for the timing on the release of the Podesta emails and that.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks has a really interesting about section. They have a mission statement. It is a serious publication and with deep morals, I mean, and principled. It's a very Julian Assange is a very principled person, and the organization is principled. And I just want to read something. It says, WikiLeaks' promise to each whistleblower is complete anonymity. And once the leaked documents were thoroughly vetted, WikiLeaks promised to broadcast their leaks to the world. It is a falsehood that WikiLeaks picked through leaks, choosing what to publish and what not to publish. Assange did not choose to publish the DNC leaks. It was his obligation to the whistleblower to do so. So there's a contract between WikiLeaks and the whistleblower. They say, yes, if your leaks prove to be accurate and they're thoroughly vetted, we will get the willy-nilly, like they make it sound like, you know, he goes through and decides for political reasons what he's going to target with his, email release or his leaked document release. It's an obligation that he feels he has to the whistleblower.
Yeah, good point. I want to give the national website address, which is assangedefense.org. And they have a section on there with the different groups who are listed on there with our contact. And you can get lots of good information. And also they have an action page of things to do. And I encourage you to look at that, Assange Defense, ASSANGE, defense.org.
Thank you. I'm going to include all these links in the description, everything that I can possibly. Again, I'm one of those type of people. I don't believe that you can read too much, watch too much. My parents raised me that way, to sort of be a free thinker, not to give myself a plug, but I mean, I guess it was appropriate to come up with that title. Is there something else? I did want to mention some of the positivity and the global support for Assange, because there is a lot of people that are keeping close eyes on these developments. Is that something that you all feel that we maybe didn't talk about enough, or something that you all want to bring up now in this closing 5 to 10 minutes? If so, is there something you all can think of?
Well, Paula, why don't you tell us about October 8th?
Or let Mike go, and then before October 8th, I have another little thing to say. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Kiko, you mentioned that there's a lot of international support for Assange, which there is. And one other thing that I noticed when we were organizing our demonstration against Garland was that there was a lot of worker support for Assange. We had supporters from the Harvard University Dining Hall Union out there supporting Assange, because they realized how important it was to protect whistleblowers and people who report abuse, I guess, as workers who see lots of abuse themselves from the university and who are always fighting for better working conditions and fighting for contracts. They understand how important it is to protect someone like Assange, who reveals all of that those different types of abuse and corruption. So we had a lot of worker support there. And then I guess one other point I wanted to add, as Paula mentioned earlier, that the current extradition against Assange is just regarding what Chelsea Manning gave to Assange about Iraq and Afghanistan, and that it's a misconception that Assange is being prosecuted for anything to do with the DNC or Russia. But there actually was a lawsuit against Assange by the DNC several years ago, trying to prosecute him in a civil court in New York for disclosing DNC emails, and the judge threw that case out because he said it would have been a violation of the First Amendment, and that and that publishing documents that have been stolen is just what journalists do, and that would be a threat to any journalist. So regarding the DNC, it's important to note that had already been determined in a civil court that there was nothing the DNC could do to prosecute Assange because his work was just standard journalism.
Absolutely. Do you all want to close it, the October 8th event, just for the listeners? This is going to be a pretty big event in DC, and I know that there are other areas around the world that have their own Assange rallies and protests going on as well. But can we speak a little bit more to the October 8th event too?
We can. I hate to backtrack, but this is a big
no. Backtrack as much as possible.
Okay, there's just a little bit of cleanup on the red flags and the irregularities of the case. And one of the big ones is that the key U.S. prosecution's key witness recanted his testimony. So they were trying to pin hacking on him, and the only the witness they had was Sigurdur Thordarson. And he's a convicted fraudster and pedophile. And that was the U.S. prosecution's key witness in the case. And he recanted his testimony. He said the FBI granted him immunity if he would do that. And right now he was arrested in South America somewhere, and he's serving time in Iceland. So that, I want everyone to know, is the U.S. prosecution's key witness against Julian Assange, because they haven't been able to prove anything else. And they're just trying to get him on the hacking charge. So I did want to mention that. And also, people can go really in the weeds about the Swedish investigation and so many things. But I always say, all you have to do is listen to the watchdogs. The watchdogs in the United States are the human rights organizations. It's Amnesty, it's ACLU, it's the press freedom groups, it's the United Nations. And I want to remind people or educate people that there were 2 UN reports in 2015 and 2019, the United Nations Working Group of Arbitrary Detention, that came out and said the red flag on the Swedish case is that it dragged on forever. And that told them that it was a political motivated thing, and that Julian Assange needed to be released immediately and fully compensated. And the same group came out again in 2019 to reiterate what their decision in 2015. The other one was the UN Special Torture Rapporteur, Nils Melzer, who wrote a book on Julian Assange. It's really quite the Bible, because if anyone wants to read about the Swedish case, you can learn all about it from Nils Melzer, because he speaks fluently 5 languages. And so he's able to look at all the emails, all the documentation on the Swedish investigation. And so he's such a great source. So here we have all these brilliant voices, the watchdogs, ACLU, Amnesty. They formed a coalition of dozens of civil liberties groups. They wrote letters to Biden, wrote 2 letters to Merrick Garland, and it's all disregarded. So the watchdogs are to keep the United States accountable for its actions, but they are disregarded. So that tells everything about the case. Here you have all the watchdogs trying to free Julian Assange, and the government ignores any of the reports that are given to them. So right now we have nothing to hold the government in account. We don't have a free press, and we don't have watchdogs that actually have some kind of teeth to turn this injustice, turn it right.
Yeah.
And that's a scary situation. I have a question actually, but before we do have any concluding words, for people who have been following Assange for a while, for people who took a lot from this interview with the three of you all, what exactly is the Vault 7? That is my question that I had before I forget it. That's the question I have. What exactly is Vault 7? Because I heard that reference earlier, and I think it has to do with Pompeo, but I don't know the details about it.
Mike, do you?
I guess Vault 7 was some leaks that WikiLeaks put out regarding the CIA and a lot of their cyber warfare tools and protocols. And that was when Mike Pompeo was at the time the head of the CIA before he became Secretary of State. And so that happened while Mike Pompeo was in charge. And then he was one of the biggest cheerleaders for Assange's prosecution and extradition when he was in the Trump administration after that. So I guess that probably was one of the things that really irritated Pompeo the most about the Assange case.
Mm-hmm. I find it very odd that I get a lot of different persuasions, and I think we've done a good job not really throwing the political stuff in. I mean, it is inherently political, but the fact that we're presenting information, kind of letting people draw their own conclusions, I think is really important. Because something that Susan mentioned earlier about just being on the streets and just so many people ignoring you, being oblivious to what's going on. And these are the types of people that I associate with, that I'm friends with. I'm very much a left libertarian-minded person. And so I know a lot about these types of issues, and a lot of the people that hang with me and associate with me, we share views, but we have political differences. We go different ways that politically we don't vote the same people. And it kind of bothers me that those people in an area like Boston, it kind of negate the progressive angle that these people claim to have, when you would think that would be such a bastion of hope for people just coming out in droves to support Assange. Why is it that it's still just maybe 100 people here, 100 people there, and not 55 to 100,000 people with you? It's just, to me, that's very disturbing that these progressive-minded people are choosing to sidestep the Assange situation.
Well, the peace rallies have small numbers too these days. But yeah, I wish I had a good answer. It seems so obviously important and shocking and desperate and urgent to me. And then a lot of people are just not thinking about that kind of thing.
I honestly believe it would bring, if Julian was granted justice, the justice that he deserved, I believe that this would be a uniting cry for the country. I hear people, I have some Trump associates, and they say that they care about Assange. I'm saying to myself, do you realize, what that administration did to him and what the current one is doing to him? And so I'm trying to get all my friends together and think, what would be the implications if Julian does get free how will people change their minds about these sorts of issues going forward with free speech and First Amendment? Because if he's ultimately not given justice, we don't really have a going back in time to honest journalism. I mean, there's never going to be another WikiLeaks, in my opinion, if he doesn't get his justice.
Yep. So important.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you all have any concluding words as far as getting the message out for him? Just as far as the interview is concerned, things that are going to happen after October the 8th. So 2 minutes for each person before we conclude. You're muted, Paula.
Are we talking about October 8th now, or are we talking?
No, we're talking October the 8th and beyond. After that event, is there anything else planned? And sort of just any closing remarks that you have?
Yeah, it's a little frustrating that there aren't more people in the streets about this. When we talk about that, I always think of the current WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, Kristen Harafson, who says at a lot of rallies, he says, people ask me, why should I fight for Julian when we have climate change and this and that, and fight for fair wages? And he says, because if we don't have free press, if we don't have free speech, if we are silenced, we can't fight for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has to be triggered in some way where it connects to you, like Mike was talking about the union workers. Union workers need a drop box. They need some safe place to put their complaints, because it's not going to be dealt with when you go to the people, the administration. And we have in October 8th in Washington, D.C., I'm helping organize that. It's a marathon, speakerathon, I'm calling it, because we have 20 speakers. And they're such interesting people. They're not usually the same. They're not the same usual supporters. We have journalists. We have Chris Hedges. We have human rights lawyer Stephen Donziger, who's going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
We have Eliza Blue, that I didn't know much about. She's a human trafficking survivor and advocate. And it clicked for her. She said, I can't advocate for the people and the children that need help if we don't have a free press. So she's coming down and speaking, and she wrote a beautiful article, personal article about free press, and got several quotes. So I think something has to trigger that it applies to you and the life, the things that are important to you. And it's a slow movement, but we're seeing momentum, and more and more people getting on board with this. So I hope everybody turns out to October 8th. It's at noon, 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. We're going to circle the best we can the Department of Justice using a yellow ribbon that I'm working on. And so we're going to circle the DOJ and in solidarity to Julian Assange's wife, who has circle the Parliament event, where they actually have 4,000 people joining hands to circle the Parliament. So it's and there are there's several global events happening the same day. So thank you, Kiko, for having us on.
Absolutely. And I did tell a lie before we go to Mike and Susan. I do have another question, but I have two questions. Is this going to be something that people who can't be in DC physically, can they watch it streaming somewhere? Is there going to be a main channel for that?
I think it's going to go out on several platforms. That always comes together last minute. You know how that goes. Mm-hmm. We've set up a nice sound system, and we're going to have the tough thing is we're going to be competing with another event the same day, which is the Women's March.
Oh, wow.
It's going to be huge. It's going to be thousands, probably, I don't know how many thousands of people in the street for that they're organizing and marching that same day. So they're going to be drawing all the mainstream media away from us, if there were to be any. And even the independent media is going to be hard to attract. But we'll do the best. We have lots of people organizing. We have Roar Media, as Consortium News will help us. And so a lot of media people are joining in the organizing, which is really nice. It's been a great organizing experience because there's so many of us from different parts of the country and who are flying out to make this happen. So yeah, so when we get closer to the date, we'll broadcast where it can be seen.
Awesome. Susan and Mike?
Well, I just hope everybody can join us in this. It's so important. We have to get Julian Assange out. He could die any day.
Yeah.
He had a stroke in October as he was watching the US appeal the decision to let him go. And he's just getting weaker by the week. It's going to be a terrible thing if he dies in prison, and we just have to get him out.
100%.
Yeah, I guess there are, as Paula mentioned, there are demonstrations going on in the UK, just like there are here in the US. But I think probably our best avenue right now is to just try and advocate that either Merrick Garland drop all of the DOJ's charges against him, or that Joe Biden issue a pardon for him, both of which would end the proceedings immediately. But yeah, it's important to remember this isn't just about Julian Assange, but it's about the US government making an example of him and sending a message against anyone who's, thinking about exposing their crimes and their corruption and their foreign policy agenda, just to stay silent, because if they can prosecute Assange for his leaks and for his journalism, then they can prosecute anyone they really want to who exposes the government, and they can go after any journalistic outlets they want. So it's much bigger than just one person. It's about the future of the free press in the US.
Absolutely. I have one final question, and then I'm going to ask where people can find you all after they hear this very interesting and informative conversation. If they want to reach out to you directly to maybe have a question to you. The question that I had, the concluding question, was how is WikiLeaks able to sustain itself right now? Because I think it's still current. The status of it is still current. So how is WikiLeaks able to survive right now, even though its founder is in the situation that he's in right now?
Well, it's a real organization. It's not just him.
Mm-hmm.
He's the charismatic founder and very important to the organization, but they are still releasing information and carrying on and working on his behalf to try to get him out, along with the rest of the movement.
That's
well,
awesome.
You probably know more about what they're doing.
I beg your pardon?
I think you can, go to wikileaks.org and contribute to them. That's probably how they are able to sustain themselves, or at least that's a part of it. Yeah.
Okay. And so how do people reach you all with their questions and stuff? If you all are comfortable disclosing any information that you want to my audience.
Well, people could call me at 617-501-9125, or they can write Susan B. MCL at Gmail, and I'll be happy to hear from any people who have questions or want to join us or want to tell us whatever they want to tell us.
Thank you so much. Paula?
Yeah, and I can be reached, unfortunately, we don't have a website, but you can reach me at assangeboston@gmail.com. The national committee is assangedefense.org, and that has ways to take action. They have a wonderful take action page. I tell people to follow Stella Morris's Twitter page. That's Julian Assange's wife and partner, and mother of their 2 children. Her Twitter page is up to date as far as everything that's going on. She tweets all the events and all the awards he's winning and all the updates. And so those are the 2 I would check: Stella Morris's Twitter page and assangedefense.org. They do a good job on keeping their everything updated.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess anyone can email me at miccioli@uchicago.edu.
Thank you all so much. Again, I can't tell you how happy I am to be able to have had this conversation and just really stick to the information. This podcast is really about disseminating truthful information, not so much into personalities and trying to find as many clicks. I mean, we do appreciate getting clicks and listens and watches, but that's not my primary objective because I am a professor in my actual personal life. And I want to kind of do this stuff outside of academia because I was telling Paula on the phone that academia, I feel like it's tying me down and it's trying to keep me conformed in this box. And I know a lot of my colleagues have things to say too, but they're too afraid to speak up against the university. I guess it's a firewall, I call it that. And I'm just tired of it. I don't know if I can keep being in education and just hide who I am and ignore these types of issues. And so that's why I created the forum in the first place, out of frustration within the academic establishment. And I hope that everyday working class people who aren't associated with the university can get the benefit of this information as well. We can be reached at any of the major podcasting platforms. We do have our YouTube channel back up. We appreciate any financial support. We don't tout it a whole lot. Maybe I should, I don't know. But the links are on there if people do want to keep these guests and, you know, just to help with technology and stuff like that, logistical information. But we do have next week a renowned sociologist from Australia. She's actually the most famous sociologist in Australia. Her name is Raywin Connell, and she's published over 20 books. And we're going to talk 8 p.m. my time, 12 p.m. Sydney time, because they're having a time change next week, daylight savings time. They're going into the summer. And so we have a bunch of unbelievable guests coming up down the road. John Stasevich is also going to be at the rally that you all mentioned, October the 8th. He was on my podcast a few episodes ago. So we try to get activist-minded people, third-party, independent-minded people to sort of combat all these different narratives that we get all the time. And so, again, I appreciate you all's time speaking to this very important issue. This is probably one of my more serious episodes, but, you know, these episodes are supposed to be impactful. I want them to be impactful. And so hopefully people take the information and they can spread it to friends and family alike. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kiko.